10 most scenic drives in the US. Howdy. Today I'm talking about the 10 most scenic drives in the US. I've been fortunate enough to drive around the country many times and I've seen some really beautiful drives. In this video, I want to talk about the 10 I believe are the most beautiful in my opinion. This is not going to be a countdown, just an overview of the drives. Although I will save my personal favorite one for the very end. All of the footage and images you're going to see are taken from the side of the road or very nearby. You won't have to stop and get out of the car, hike for a couple of miles to get to some of these spots, or drive down some weird funky dirt road to get to them. Also, I have not been to either Alaska or Hawaii, and although I'm sure there are some very beautiful drives in those states, I won't be including them because I haven't done them. So let's take a look at the 10 most beautiful drives in the contiguous US. Number 10. Oregon Coast. I want to start by talking about the Oregon Coast. The whole coast is very nice, but I want to focus on the parks between Lincoln City and Brookings. This follows US Highway 101, and for most of the stretch, you're right along the coast. There are a few spots where you go a little bit inland, but one thing that is great about Oregon is that all of the beaches are public. There's public access all along the way, and there's no big development going up and down the coast. There are no big cities. The biggest towns are under 10,000 people. There is a part where you go inland a little bit around Coos Bay, which is the big city in the area with about 15,000 people. Number 9. Theodore Roosevelt NP. Next, I want to talk about the drive in and around Theodore Roosevelt National Park in western North Dakota. If you didn't know beforehand, and you've had to guess what state this was based on this footage, you might need about 40 guesses or so to get North Dakota. This is one of my favorite national parks in the country, and it's a great spot to get away from crowds. You'll see a lot of wildlife here. A ton of bison, a lot of wild horses, big prairie dog towns, and just the general scenery of the North Dakota Badlands is beautiful. Number 8. Badlands. The next drive I want to talk about is in their neighbor to the south, South Dakota. When most people think of scenic beauty in South Dakota, they're going to think about Mount Rushmore and the Black Hills first, and that's both very nice. But what I want to talk about here is the drive between the town of Custer and Badlands National Park. Just east of the town of Custer, you get to Custer State Park, which has got some nice scenery. But the best part about this drive is you're guaranteed to see a whole bunch of bison. They'll just be there, chilling, roaming the streets, wishing people weren't there to bother them. But going a little bit farther east, you get to Badlands National Park, and this is where the scenery gets gorgeous. Number 7. Florida Keys. Heading way southeast is the drive across the Florida Keys. I'm talking specifically here US Highway 1 between Key Largo and Key West. The whole drive between the two is almost like being on one big bridge. You go through all kinds of small islands, the Keys, and the whole time you're just seeing this beautiful turquoise water. There are several spots where you can stop and get out of your car along the way, and I remember I stopped at one and got out of the car and saw a couple of iguanas running around. I can see this road being kind of a pain in the butt and high traffic on busy holiday weekends, but it's all worth it when you get to the end at the Contra Public. Number 6. Central Colorado. In my opinion, the most beautiful stretch of drive along an interstate is Interstate 70 in the central part of Colorado, between the towns of Eagle and Idaho Springs. This is the highest elevation of anywhere on a U.S. interstate. The highest point is Loveland Pass at just under 12,000 feet. To go over the pass, the interstate itself goes through a tunnel, but you can take a side exit and go on US Highway 6 to go over the actual pass. And with you being in almost 12,000 feet for a good chunk of the year, there's going to be a lot of snow on the mountains. So if you want to experience high altitude and thin air but not go on some crazy hike or some weird back roads, you can do it on I-70 in central Colorado. Number 5. Blue Ridge Parkway. Next up, arguably the most famous drive in the US, the Blue Ridge Parkway. This goes through a large part of the southern Appalachians in North Carolina and Virginia. And my favorite part of the drive is the stretch between Asheville and Boone. You go right near Mount Mitchell, which is the highest peak in the eastern US, and this is a very nice drive no matter what time of the year you do this. The most popular time is going to be the fall, especially October during the peak fall foliage season. But that's also when it's the busiest. So you could go in the spring or summer, and it's still very nice, very green. And even during the winter, with no leaves on the trees, a light dusting of snow is still very pretty. Number 4. Big Sur. Next up is arguably the most famous drive in the western US, and that's the Big Sur coastline in California. You've probably seen footage and images of this drive many times, and a lot of folks who are not familiar with California think this is much farther north in the state than it is. This is California Highway 1 between the towns of Carmel and San Simeon, which is where Hearst Castle is. And for most of this drive, you're along a big high cliff. There are all kinds of pull-offs you can look over at some big drop-offs down to the ocean. Number 3. Michigan Up. Next, I want to mention the north shore of the Upper Peninsula of Michigan along Lake Superior. Specifically, I'm talking about the stretch between the towns of Marquette and Grand Marais. You're hugging the lakeshore for a big chunk of this drive. You can see Grand Island out in the lake as you go around it. And it goes right to Pictured Rock's National Lakeshore, which is a nice spot. You can't see the beautiful cliffs of Pictured Rock from the road, but you are not that far from it. But even if you don't go off the main road into the national lakes or just stay on the road, is a nice drive. You'll go around some nice dunes and you'll end up in a really cute town of Grand Marais. Most of the Yup of Michigan is very beautiful and very wooded, but especially this spot along the north shore of the Upper Peninsula is where you have some of the most beautiful views. Number 2, West Maine Wilderness. Next up is a nice drive around some mountain lakes in western Maine. I'm talking primarily about the areas around Rangeley Lake, Mount Blue State Park, and the Sandy River Valley. Part of this area is called the Carabasset Valley. I'm not sure about how it's pronounced, but just some nice wilderness mountain lakes. Rangeley, or maybe it's Rangeley, I know is a very popular spot for people from Maine to go to in the summer, a popular spot for people to have cabins. But even if you're just doing the loop drive in the area, you'll get some fantastic scenery. And I'm pretty sure there are some characters from Stephen King novels buried out there. In general, western northwestern Maine is where you're going to find some of the deepest wilderness in the eastern US. Number 1, Southern Utah. And now, what I think is the most beautiful drive in the US is the drive in Southern Utah. Southern Utah, going through the national parks Zion, Bryce Canyon, and Capitol Reef. This is classic canyon country and a big part of the Grand Circle road trip tour that a lot of people do. The whole Grand Circle includes the 5 national parks of Utah, as well as the Grand Canyon and other parts of northern Arizona. But I do think this particular stretch is the most beautiful. Driving through Bryce Canyon National Park requires going down a spur road into the park, but it's worth it. And there's another spot called the Hogback, which is just this crazy ridge. It's a narrow road with a big steep drop off on both sides. I've driven over that part many times, and when I've been with other people, they always get kind of freaked out. So that's my overview of the 10 most scenic drives in the US. This is a huge country, it's a beautiful country, and the best way to see it is from the road. I made sure to include different drives from various parts of the country, so that way everybody is fairly close to at least one of these. I hope you enjoyed this video. If you did, please give me a thumbs up to let me know you approve and subscribe to this channel.